142 laps. 423 kilometers. On a track nobody was allowed to watch. During spring break. While the rest of the Formula One grid was scattered across holiday destinations, Lewis Hamilton quietly drove to Maranello, pulled on his helmet, and climbed into the SF-26. The sprinklers were already running. The track was soaked. And for the next 2 days, on a circuit tucked behind Ferrari's factory gates where cameras don't follow and journalists can't reach, he ran lap after lap after lap through controlled artificial rain, learning something about this car that no amount of simulator time could ever teach him. Then Pirelli made a call that nobody expected. They wanted him back for a second day. Not Charles Leclerc. Not a reserve driver. Hamilton, again. And that decision, quiet as it was, points toward something that could shift the balance of Ferrari's entire 2026 season. The test took place on April 9th and 10th at Ferrari's private Fiorano circuit. On paper, it was a standard Pirelli tire development day, the kind of obligatory program that manufacturers run to gather data for future compound designs. Under FIA regulations, every sensor reading, every tire temperature trace, every pressure log from those sessions belongs exclusively to Pirelli. Ferrari receives nothing. The rulebook is unambiguous about that. But the rulebook, as it turns out, cannot cover everything. To understand what actually happened at Fiorano, you first need to understand the place itself, because this is not simply a test track. It is the most private piece of tarmac in motorsport. Enzo Ferrari built it in 1972, driven by a growing frustration with public circuits and the prying eyes that came with them. What he created was entirely his own. He placed his personal home inside the circuit at the figure-of-8 crossing, so that he could watch testing at any hour of the day or night. The story goes that if a car sounded wrong at 3 in the morning, Enzo knew about it before the engineers did. The track runs just under 3 kilometers per lap, and its corners were designed as deliberate echoes of famous Formula One challenges: Tarzan from Zandvoort, Brunn from the Nürburgring, Rascasse from Monaco. When Michael Schumacher arrived at Ferrari in 1996, he walked the circuit, decided the first 3 corners didn't match what a modern car needed, and had them rebuilt. His lap record, 55.99 seconds, set in the F2004, still stands more than 20 years later. Every Ferrari Formula One car since 1972 has made its first laps here. The SF-26 was no different, running its debut at Fiorano on January 23. And what makes the circuit uniquely suited to a wet weather test is a system installed in 2008, underground tanks capable of flooding the track surface on demand, creating precise and repeatable wet conditions regardless of what the Italian sky chooses to do. On April 9th, under 21 degrees Celsius and a clear sky, the sprinklers came on and the circuit became a controlled downpour. Hamilton arrived and got to work. The first morning was spent running full wet compounds that Pirelli is developing for the 2027 season. Different constructions, different tread patterns, evaluated back-to-back across multiple runs. By early afternoon, the program shifted to intermediate tires, and this is where the session began to carry real weight. Because the transition window between full wets and intermediates is not just a technical detail. It is one of the most consequential decisions in all of wet weather racing. When the track is drying and the moment arrives to switch from full wets to intermediates, the driver and the pit wall have a narrow, unforgiving window. Time it right, swap at the exact point where the drying surface offers just enough grip for the intermediates to come alive, and you gain 2 to 3 seconds per lap while rivals are still destroying their full wets on a track that no longer needs them. Time it wrong, commit too early when standing water still pools through the corners, and you send your driver out on cold intermediates that haven't built enough heat to cope, and the car becomes a liability. Titles have turned on that single call. Championships have been lost in that window. Hamilton spent an entire day living inside it, in the SF-26, feeling precisely where the car moves from being controlled by the tire to being governed by the water underneath it. His fastest lap on day 1 was 1 minute 1.031 seconds, a number that means nothing in isolation given the test compounds and artificial conditions, but those 142 laps of switch zone calibration represent a kind of knowledge that no simulator session can replicate, because a simulator cannot put spray across your visor or make you feel standing water through the floor of the car. Then came a moment that said more than any lap time could. During an afternoon run on day 1, Hamilton went wide at a corner, collected gravel and grass across his full wet tires, and rejoined the track without stopping. No slowdown. No radio call. He was pushing the absolute limit of the SF26 in wet conditions on a day that most drivers in his position would treat as a routine obligation, a paid chore to be completed without real risk. The fact that he was pushing hard enough to find the edge tells you exactly where his head is right now. Day 2 was even more intense. 155 laps. 461 kilometers. Hamilton's best time improved to 1 minute 0.740 seconds as conditions warmed to 22 degrees. The morning program introduced Pirelli's extreme wet prototype, a tire built around a completely new tread pattern that had been trialed the previous week at Suzuka with Red Bull and the Racing Bulls. The goal was specific: stretch the operational range of the full wet tire into lighter rain conditions, reducing the number of moments in a race where the call to pit becomes a genuine coin flip. From mid-afternoon, Hamilton crossed back to intermediates, this time mapping the crossover from the other direction, identifying precisely where the intermediate compound begins to fail in heavier standing water. By the time the program ended, he had covered 884 kilometers in total across both days. 297 laps on a circuit that is barely 3 kilometers long. Now here is where the story becomes genuinely interesting. The rules say Ferrari got nothing from those 2 days. No data. No development benefit. No lap time information to feed back into the car. Every hard number from those 297 laps sits in Pirelli's database, not Ferrari's. That is the story the rulebook tells, and it is technically accurate. But rules govern data. They do not govern what a driver's body learns through doing something 297 times. Hamilton now knows how the SF26 turns under braking on a soaked surface. He knows how the rear behaves when the throttle arrives a fraction too early through standing water. He knows how the energy recovery system adjusts in real time when the rear wheels lose grip and the hybrid output has to recalibrate to avoid overwhelming available traction. He knows how the active aerodynamics, the spinning rear wing that the paddock has nicknamed the Macarena, because its upper element flips completely inverted at speed, shifts the car's balance at different speeds through spray. None of those things are numbers on a screen. They are instincts now, burned into the nervous system lap by lap, corner by corner, in a way that no briefing document or simulator run can reproduce. And critically, this is not the same car he briefly sampled in the wet at Barcelona back in January. That shakedown used an early, rough version of the SF26 that has since been fundamentally reshaped. New floor specification. Reworked suspension geometry. Updated software. Weight redistribution across the chassis. The car Hamilton drove through the Fiorano spray is far closer to the machine he will race at Miami than anything he had previously driven in wet conditions. That gap in knowledge, between what the car was and what it is now, just got closed over 2 days in artificial rain. The reason Pirelli chose Hamilton over Leclerc for the second day also matters. Leclerc had been penciled in for Thursday, the straightforward split of 1 driver per day. Pirelli stepped in and changed that. Their reasoning was methodical. Comparing test compounds across different sessions requires a single consistent reference. 2 drivers feel different things, prioritize different sensations, describe the same tire behavior in different terms. One might focus on front-end confidence through a slow corner. Another might zero in on rear traction exiting a hairpin. Pirelli could not afford a moving target in their data, so Hamilton became their fixed point across the full program. Leclerc spent day 2 at the Maranello simulator running deep preparation work on Ferrari's Miami upgrade package. It was a deliberate split, one driver building real-world wet weather instincts in the car, the other building virtual aerodynamic knowledge for a pressing upgrade deadline. 2 paths feeding the same goal from opposite ends. What made Hamilton's presence at Fiorano genuinely notable was the contrast with his own history. During his years at Mercedes, he treated tire test duties as something to be delegated. Whenever the rules permitted, he handed those sessions to Valtteri Bottas or a test driver and moved on. Choosing to spend the spring break running 884 kilometers through artificial rain, and then agreeing without hesitation when Pirelli asked for a second day beyond what had been planned, is a measurable change in behavior. Fred Vasseur was spotted at the Fiorano pit box during running. This was not a driver going through the motions. 3 races into his Ferrari career, Hamilton's journey has been uneven, but the direction is clear. Australia was a tough beginning, 7th in qualifying, more than half a second behind Leclerc, finishing 4th while his teammates stood on the podium. He was still unlearning the habits that Mercedes had built into him over more than a decade. Brake later, carry more entry speed, trust the car to rotate. The SF26 asks for something different, and Melbourne was a crash course in humility for a driver who had spent 20 years feeling immediately fast in every car he entered. China was the turning point. Hamilton qualified third, 1/10 behind Leclerc, and at the race start made an outside move on Kimi Antonelli at the first braking zone, the kind of committed, instinctive lunge that only comes from a driver who has stopped second-guessing himself. He battled Leclerc through the middle stint in fierce but clean racing and finished third. His first Ferrari podium. His 203rd career podium overall. By his own words afterward, it was one of the most fun races he had been part of in a long time. His body language on the Shanghai podium looked like a man who had been holding his breath for 3 months and finally let it out. Japan pulled the curtain back on the problem that still defines Ferrari's season. 6th on the grid. 6th at the flag. Every time the SF26 hit a straight at Suzuka, the Mercedes-powered cars pulled away with a clarity that was impossible to ignore, an estimated 20 to 25 brake horsepower advantage that transforms every long flat-out section into a slow drain on Ferrari's race position. The chassis is arguably the best on the 2026 grid. Multiple rival engineers have said as much. But the moment the cars stop turning, the deficit becomes visible. The standings tell the story of where that leaves Ferrari. Mercedes lead the Constructors' Championship on 135 points, Antonelli with 2 wins, Russell with 1. Ferrari sit second on 90. McLaren are third on 46, with Oscar Piastri's second place in Japan suggesting they are beginning to close the gap from behind. The window in which Ferrari can position themselves as genuine title challengers rather than a reliable but second-best team is narrowing with each race weekend that passes without a victory. The answer, Ferrari insists, arrives at the Miami Grand Prix on May 1st. Vasseur has described what amounts to a package and a half of upgrades, a reworked floor-targeting downforce without additional drag, aerodynamic revisions across multiple body surfaces, targeted weight reductions, cooling improvements built specifically for Florida's heat and humidity, and new engine software designed to address the superclipping effect that bleeds top speed on long straights. The Macarena wing is central to that story. Miami's 3 long straights will be the first real test of whether Ferrari's software fix can close the speed gap without sacrificing the energy management patterns that make their race starts so consistently effective. A Monza filming day on April 22nd with both drivers will evaluate the package before the freight ships to Florida. Longer term, Ferrari expect FIA-approved additional engine development allocation by mid-season, potentially up to 30 brake horsepower in the second half of 2026. Combined with the Miami package, the 45-point gap to Mercedes starts to look less like a verdict and more like a starting position. The final piece of this story sits in the contrast between 2 champions and how they each chose to spend the same 5 weeks. Max Verstappen used the spring break to race GT3 cars at the Nürburgring with his own team, building toward a Nürburgring 24 hours debut scheduled for May 14th, a commitment that sits directly inside the active Formula One season. He qualified on pole at the NLS2 race in March by 1.9 seconds before a tire regulation breach removed the result. His public commentary on the 2026 regulations has been consistent and pointed. The energy management racing feels like a video game, the format is wrong, and the question of whether this championship earns his full commitment hangs over every press conference he attends. His Red Bull contract runs through 2028, but he has declined repeatedly to confirm he will see it out. Hamilton's view, expressed after Japan, sits at the direct opposite end of that conversation. From where he stands, the passing in 2026 is real. The lead changes are genuine. The tactical layer that energy management adds to race strategy delivers exactly what compelling racing should look like. And the SF26, in the corners where it is free to do what it does, carries a piece of his own influence, time he spent in the factory shaping the design thinking before a single race had been run. 2 champions, 2 different places in their relationship with this version of the sport. One grinding 884 kilometers through fake rain on a 3-kilometer track during a holiday break because every single lap deepens his feel for a car he is still learning to trust. The other competing at a different circuit while publicly questioning whether the championship he has dominated still earns his full attention, with talk of an early exit from his contract growing louder after every interview. Ferrari's spring break was not a break. Fiorano tire test. Maranello TPC running. Monza filming day on April 22nd. Simulator work running around the clock. This championship is 4 races old and already the team that turns every free hour into preparation has a different look to the team that treats the calendar gaps as rest. Those 884 kilometers won't appear on any data log, but they'll show up in the wet.